This war has also reignited an old debate. Who is a terrorist? Whatever the definition, you think Hamas qualify. They killed more than 1,400 innocent Israelis. Even children were not spared. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. But tell that to the BBC. They don't call Hamas terrorists. They call them Palestinian militants or fighters. And the British Prime Minister has a problem with that. Here's what his officials are saying, and I'm quoting. The Prime Minister has said repeatedly that Hamas are not militants, they are terrorists. It is incumbent on our national broadcaster to recognize that. The national broadcaster is the BBC. And it's not just Rishi Sunak. One of the hostages taken by Hamas is the mother of a therapist in London. He wants the BBC to change its policy to call Hamas terrorists. So why don't they do it? Why don't they call them terrorists? Well, the BBC's position was explained by their World Affairs editor, John Simpson. Listen to his justification. This is what he said. Terrorism is a loaded word which people use about an outfit they disapprove of morally. It's simply not the BBC's job to tell people who to support and who to condemn. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? How about that? It is not the BBC's job to tell people who the good guys are. But guess what? The job has been flipped because people are now telling the BBC who the bad guys are. And among them is the British Prime Minister. And frankly, it's not that tough. If you kill children, you are not one of the good guys. If you massacre a village, same thing. Yet many groups find it difficult to accept that Hamas is a terror group. I know some people romanticize the concept. They say one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. They are wrong too. Killing innocent civilians is not a fight for freedom, it is bloodlust. And this happens across the world. Consider the situation in Kashmir. In February 2019, the Pulwama attack happened. A bus carrying Indian security officials was bombed. 40 of them were killed. And what did the BBC say? That militants attacked the bus. Not terrorists, but militants. We're talking about the Jaish-e-Mohammed here, a bona fide terrorist group, one that is sanctioned and listed by the United Nations Security Council, yet the BBC call them militants. Do you see the problem here? Words determine the scale and seriousness of the attack. A terrorist is different from a militant. Let's look at the dictionary definitions. Who is a terrorist? Someone who uses violence for political purposes. And who is a militant? Someone who is determined and often willing to use force. So there is a clear difference. When you call a terrorist a militant, you downplay their threat. It's like calling a heart attack a chest pain. Technically, you're not wrong, but in reality, there is a huge difference. So what's the solution here? To be honest, we are very far from any solution because there is no agreement on the definition. There is no globally accepted definition of what is terrorism or who is a terrorist. As a result, you get different versions. For some, they are freedom fighters. For others, like the BBC, they are militants. India has highlighted this problem at the United Nations. It said that the UN is yet to agree on a common definition, let alone craft a coherent policy on terrorism. It tells you why we need a definition. Because you cannot tackle something that you can't even define. I know that circumstances are different everywhere, so is the history and the experiences, but those factors cannot justify actions of violence because then you're on a slippery slope. Just think about it. Assume that we accept the fact that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Great. But then, who defines what freedom is? What if one man's freedom is another man's tyranny? So don't let causes or history color your definitions. A terrorist is a terrorist because of their actions, because of their choices. Calling them anything else is an insult to the victims.